Welcome to the NWI.com Political Roundtable for Thursday, September 29th. I'm Robert Blaszkiewicz, Assistant Managing Editor of The Times. Here with me today, Doug Ross, Editorial Page Editor of The Times, bringing you the latest developments in local news. One kind of an interesting day this week was Tuesday. It was kind of a roller coaster ride in terms of one story. That's the supposed announcement that Allegiant Air was going to be beginning flights, passenger flights out of Gary Airport to Las Vegas, and then later in the day we got word that the announcement was canceled and basically the deal fell through. Doug, what kind of happened here, and what does that say about the airport?
Well, one thing it says is that the airport is just not ready for, well, I was going to say really not ready for takeoff, but not ready for landings either in this case. But you know, the simple fact is that the expansion project was announced, you know, years ago. Was originally projected to have been finished by now, and that of course meant lengthening the runway.
Right. And this was an expansion project that was dependent. The big sticking point and the big expense in this project was moving certain railroad tracks that are next to the airport. The need to move those tracks before you extend the runway.
And the problem is getting, you know, the railroad negotiators to move from their sticking points.
Right.
And so, you know, now the airport officials are going to Congress, you know, to our congressional delegation to see if it'll, you know, take, you know, maybe not literally an act of Congress, but an act of the congressional delegation to get them to move on this. I mean, it's a tough one. It really is.
Well, and maybe this is, you know, clear evidence of something where, you know, an airline would have been here had the expansion, had the runway been expanded.
And you know, Allegiant, you know, maybe they were using this as a ruse to hide something else. We don't know. But you know, the simple fact is that had they expanded it, then it would have been one less argument against the airport for Allegiant to come.
Sure. Moving on to another topic, the ongoing kind of debate over the victims of the Indiana State Fair stage collapse, and there's a couple different aspects to this story, and we've seen it in the news. One is obviously how much these victims are entitled to in terms of compensation for the deaths and the injuries. Indiana has limits on liability and how much can be paid. But another interesting aspect to it is that a victim who was part of a same-sex couple, and that partner who, you know, was married. They were married in another state. Marriage not recognized in Indiana. But what is that person entitled to? So,
well, that's going to be a tough one because, I mean, you know, Indiana recognizes, as does every other state, recognizes opposite-sex marriages that are, you know, man and woman, marriages that are performed anywhere else in the country, pretty much anywhere else in the world, I would say. And so now here we have the situation where same-sex marriages are being performed in some states, but not recognized and not performed in other states. So this becomes a huge issue of, you know, if you're going to do it for opposite-sex couples, are you going to do the same for same-sex couples? And, you know, clearly this is one for the judges to sort out, and this is going to the Supreme Court. You can guarantee it.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. And also it'll be interesting to see if there has been some movement among suggestions from lawmakers that those limits that are currently in place be raised, or
the liability cap is something like $5 million.
Yeah, be raised or gotten rid of completely. So
and you know, that's interesting because as we talk about tort reform and you know, in the instance of healthcare reform, for instance, you know, the Republicans are fond of saying, well, if it weren't for the trial attorneys, which, you know, are Democrats are heavily in favor of them because they get a lot of money from them. So if it weren't for the trial attorneys jacking up the settlements, then the malpractice insurance goes up to cover it. You know, here we have a case where Indiana has, the tort reform that we're talking about nationally already in place in this instance. So the question is, do you loosen the cap? Do you do it on a per victim basis?
Yeah.
That's going to be a fun one to watch.
Yeah, well, and of course, a lot of people are leery about doing that because it could cost the state more money. And
exactly, it comes out of your pocket as a taxpayer.
Yeah. Speaking of costing more money, a lot of movement lately to try to cut back the size of government, reduce costs. Among those, talks about closing some local library branches.
Right, Hammond's talking about closing 2 branches, and the Hammond Public Library, I should say, not kind of separate from the city. And the Gary Public Library System is talking about shutting down one of the branches and the main library as a way of saving money. So, I mean, we talked about when the Kernan Shepherd report came out. This is the local government reform, effort. When that came out, they were talking about consolidating libraries at the county level to make sure. Now,
and that's
Lake County
primarily
already,
administration of libraries, not necessarily closing branches, but consolidating the administration.
Cutting down the overhead. And Lake County library officials fought that tooth and nail. Well, now they're closing branches.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Well, yeah, and on another count, talking about branches of local government that people use frequently, there's the post office.
Right.
And there's been a lot of talk lately about closing, reducing Postal Service, eliminating Saturday delivery, closing down certain branches of the post office. And this past week, we saw a protest with union members coming out to support preserving those services and more importantly for them, preserving those employees, those public employees.
Right. I mean, they're talking about closing post offices. I mean, thousands of them across the country. Not all of them, but something 3,000 some odd. I forget what the exact number is. I haven't even seen the list of which post offices locally would be affected. But there's that, and then there's closing postal processing centers. They originally talked about consolidating the one in Gary with the one in South Bend. Now they're talking about moving both of those elsewhere. Yeah. So, I mean, they're really getting serious about this. Is there a way to reinvent the Postal Service? Probably build in, mostly it delivers spam as far as I'm concerned. Put in a paper shredder in my mailbox. But
yeah, well, we had a discussion this week with the leader of the state AFL-CIO about that postal issue, but also about right to work and kind of the state of those efforts that to try to reduce their obviously efforts by Republicans in the state to try to reduce the influence of unions in Indiana.
Right, and this is what led to the big walkout. It was an economic development effort orchestrated by Urbana, Illinois. Just kidding.
Urbana tourism, huh?
Urbana tourism.
Yeah.
It drew the Democratic legislative delegation, all of them but one or two, to Urbana to keep them from voting on this right to work issue. Probably we ought to explain what this is. Right to work means you can go to work anywhere you want, and you don't have to, even if there's a union, you don't have to join the union, you don't have to pay any kind of fees to the union for representing you in negotiations, contract negotiations, grievances, whatever. So, it certainly weakens the union's position because they lose their bargaining power that way.
Right, and the argument, on the union's part is that if you do this, states that are right-to-work states have in fact lower wages than states that don't, and so if your aim is to increase, wealth of people and have more people in living wage jobs, this is not the way to do it.
Yeah, that's their argument. It is certainly going to be a heated political battle. They had the study commission that was meant to kind of soften the blow in the next session, but also, frankly, to just end the impasse. Yeah. So in the last session. So next session, if you think you had fun in 2012, it'll be the end of, in 2011, it'll be really fun in 2012.
Well, we'll certainly be talking about that on future editions of the Political Roundtable. And thanks for watching this week, and we'll be back next week with another NWI.com Political Roundtable.